So start, and I think we should start. So thank you very much, all of you, for joining the second day of the international webinar that is being conducted by UMRAN Academic Research Association. And it was a wonderful talk yesterday. I especially benefited a lot from this, that I will be mentioning at the end, hopefully. The people who are tuned with this symposium from all over the world, welcome you again, and especially Professor Sajal Dey and Professor Mousumi G Banerjee. It's really a pleasure seeing you all again in the second day of this webinar. So I think without further ado, I would like to give a brief introduction again, Professor Mousumi G Banerjee, who has been a continuous support to UMRAN, and we are very grateful for that. Professor Mousumi G Banerjee is a professor, associate professor at University of IFU in Shillong, and she's also head of department. Let me. Okay, so we had. I would like to give a brief introduction. Professor Sajal Dey is also a professor at the same university, and we have been discussing in this is the 2 days webinar on Tagore and Pushkin, and that we are finding, the conscience or conscience that had been developing at the same time in a different location. One is in India and another is in Russia, and it's very nice to talk about this cosmopolitan spirit in a broader sense, in a broader identity, that we can go beyond the boundary. So without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Mousumi G Banerjee, who will be moderating this second day of the symposium. So Professor Mousumi, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Rajiv, very much. Good evening and good morning. Let this again depend on the part of the world you are in at the moment. And this, of course, everyone here today for the second deliberation on Alexandr Pushkin and the concept of little man and literature. I'm delighted to be here once again, and it is my pleasure to welcome the speaker, Dr. Sajal Dey, who is going to share with us his views on Pushkin's concept of the little man as demonstrated through Pushkin's literature. And I know this wouldn't have been possible without Rajiv and his brilliant team at the UMRAN Academic Research Association. I welcome everyone present in the audience for joining us today. I certainly hope that we are going to have a stimulating discussion, and I look forward to your enthusiastic participation in today's dialogue as well. So a few words before we take off today. As you all know, Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin, 1799 to 1837, was a Russian poet, playwright, and novelist who is considered by many to be the greatest Russian poet and the founder of modern Russian literature. That he was a prolific writer is evinced from the fact that he published his first poem at the age of 15 and was widely recognized by the literary establishment by the time of his graduation from the Tsarskoye Selo Lyceum. While at the Lyceum, Pushkin was heavily influenced by the Kantian liberal individualist teachings of Alexander Petrovich Kuritsyn, whom Pushkin would later commemorate in his poem 19th October. Pushkin also immersed himself in the thought of the French Enlightenment, to which he would remain permanently indebted throughout his life, particularly Diderot and Voltaire, whom he described as, quote, the first to follow the new road and to bring the lamp of philosophy into the dark archives of history. The first of the Russian writers who touched upon the theme of the little man was Pushkin. His story, The Station Master, is devoted to the modest existence of station supervisor Samson Virin. The story became the first of a number of works of Russian literature devoted to his theme, to this particular theme of the little man, I mean. In the poem, The Bronze Horseman, Pushkin also touched upon the problem of the little man, but in a slightly different perspective. Other writings too have explored this theme in revealing ways, and hence we look forward to an interesting discussion on the idea of the little man, an extraordinarily ironical phrase that encapsulates perhaps more than what we could literarily or semantically envisage. So for that, we now turn to Dr. Sajal Dey to begin with the deliberations on the issue. Over to you, Dr. Dey.
Professor, you are muted. Sorry, you are muted.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Dr. Banerjee, my dear colleague. And once again, thanks to the Umran team, Mr. Rajiv Kumar, our student Swasti, and warm greetings from a very cold Shillong, Meghalaya, the hilly part of Northeast India, to people who are in other places, more warmer places. Anyway, I am going to start my very brief discussion. It has to be brief because talking about Pushkin, the giant in Russian and world literature, and then connecting it to Little Man, I mean, both are a huge task. So I will just take one intersection like I took yesterday. I'll take one intersection when Pushkin meets or creates his little men and what he does to them. What is the importance of that creation, that negotiation that he does. Before that, I must pay my Guru Pranam to my teacher, Professor Charumati Ramdas at the then CIEFL in Hyderabad, Central Institute of English Language, Central Institute of English and Foreign Languages, which is now IFLU, English and Foreign Languages, Hyderabad. She was my teacher for Russian literature, and from her, I got the inspiration, the way to think out of the box. And here also, I will make use of one or 2 points that actually she initiated. My pranam and my sincere gratitude to my professor, Charumati Ramdas, who is a prolific translator. Those of you who are conversant in Hindi, you can read her translations of Pushkin and other Russian masterpieces. She is born a Marathi, but married a Telugu, Professor Ramdas, who is an equally, important person, important teacher of linguistics, Russian linguistics. With this, I end my Guru Pranam, but Gurus are always with their Shishwas, as you know. Yesterday, I started my talk by saying that there are basically 2 kinds of intellectuals on this planet: conformists and non-conformists. Conformists are those who accept the existing system or norms or order and goes by them, explains them, and is happy with that, more or less. On the other hand, non-conformists are those who dare to see beyond it, sometimes rebel against it, sometimes openly, sometimes surreptitiously, sometimes symbolically, because there are a lot of censorship, as we have seen, particularly Russian literature. There was censorship all around. before Gorbachev, even in the Soviet system, there was censorship. We know the dreadful reign of terror in Stalin's era. So conformists and non-conformists can show their non-conformism in many, many ways. It is possible that one person is conformist in one particular, against one particular thing and not the other. Maybe he considers that one more important than other things at that moment. So that debate can continue. One of the greatest conformists to my mind, non-conformists to my mind, is the great Buddha, who challenged the entire Vedic ritualistic systems. I said Vedic ritualistic systems, not the Vedic knowledge. Veda is a great, great poem, poetry, and a reservoir of huge knowledge. So, and another non-conformist on whom I worked is Rabindranath Tagore, one of the pioneers of Indian communist movement. But sadly enough, not many people know about him. I'm sure yesterday I talked about him a little bit. None of these participants know about him much. Maybe later on someday I will talk about him also. He was only next to M.N. Roy, who has taken part in the international communist movement, Comintern, and he was a non-conformist, although a communist himself, but he dared to opine differently, even living in Stalin's Russia. Thank God he didn't die, but now we know 3 of the Indian revolutionaries who were at the time in Russia died during that great purge. The information was hidden. It came out only after the Gorbachev regime, this perestroika glasnost. During that period only, we came to know of the 3 Indian revolutionaries who died mysteriously. That means they died at the hands of Stalin's butchers. Anyway, so to my mind, Pushkin was a non-conformist. And I will give 1 or 2 examples, 1 or 2 notes to show that he was a non-conformist. Then I will come to the concept of little man, and I will show what he has done with his little man characters. This is the very, my scheme of my very small lecture. Then we can have discussions. Now, talking about Russian literature, I cannot really feel, anything else than sadness, filled with a sense of huge loss because of the untimely deaths of so many writers. Pushkin, born in 1799, dies at 1837 in a duel, in an unfortunate duel with a person who was involved with his wife, maybe really or not falsely implicated in the case. And it was said that Tsar's court was behind this intrigue. Quite possible, because Pushkin was not liked by Tsar and Tsar's court. He was a rebel in that sense. He was a non-conformist in that sense. When Pushkin died, people surrounded his, and people were surrounding his place, because after the duel, it took 2 days for him to die. It's so painful death. He didn't die immediately. The bullet struck somewhere near the heart, and it took 2 days for him to die in pain. And sensing something wrong from the part of the Tsar's court, people started to gather around Pushkin's house, and sensing that something untoward can happen, Tsar's people cremated him, did his funeral in the middle of the night, far away from there, so that people cannot, come and protest and do anything untoward. Not only Pushkin, after Pushkin's death, his follower, Lermontov, another great poet of Russia, he wrote a poem, Smert Poeta, Death of a Poet. And that time, if you were not in the official this thing, then you have to write copy and spread. So that way his copy was spread among the followers, and everybody was agitated. Death of a Poet, where he made it clear that it was an intrigue, it was not a natural death, and Tsar's court was involved. Something like that he implicated. So even he was not in the good book of the Tsar. And sadly enough, Lermontov made the same fate at the age of 27. Although by that time only he has written a great novel, A Hero of Our Time, which is unparalleled in structure, in form, and in content, considering the fact that it was written in the middle of the 19th century, a hero of our time. He was a poet also. After that, we see Mayakovsky committing suicide, Sergei Yesenin committing suicide. We have seen Gorky tried to commit suicide. That time he was saved, but because of that wound, he died later on. And we know about the great Stalinist purge, where many writers and intellectuals just vanished, disappeared. So one cannot feel but sadness and sympathy for the Russians, for the Russian literature, and for the Russian writers. I must say we are in a much better position. The censorship here is not that strong. It never was that strong. It was there. Sometimes we see one or two incidents, but my heart really goes out to my Russian friends and writers. Okay, now coming to Pushkin's greatness. Why was Pushkin great? That is a debatable question, because Pushkin, debatable question to some. Pushkin is not and was not as famous as Gorky, Chekhov, Dostoevsky, or Tolstoy. Tolstoy, we pronounce it Tolstoy. He was definitely not as famous as that. One of the reasons is Pushkin's poetry, if not read in Russian, is very difficult to get the essence of it, the poeticity of it. I will give you an interesting anecdote. Some 35 years ago, when I started learning Russian in Vishwabharati, Tagore's University, I started learning Russian. There was a teacher named Dmitry Antonov. So he gave me a poem of Pushkin, a collection of poems by Pushkin in English translation. Because at that time, I was not that conversant with Russian, so I read it in English. I told him that, okay, good poem, but what's great about it? He was very angry. He said, you don't find Pushkin great? I said, no. Tagore is much greater. Do you think Pushkin is as great as Tagore? He said, what are you saying? You don't know what Pushkin is to Russians. One great writer said, Pushkin, eta nashe sio. Pushkin, it is our everything. You don't know what you're talking. So at that time, I had an altercation. Later on, when I grasped my Russian, it's a very difficult language, mind you, I took years to learn it, so that I can read the novels and poems in original. It was not an easy task for me. I was not that intelligent ever. But later on, when I read it, I understood what Pushkin is. And one of the persons who made me go through Pushkin and understand is Jagmati Ramdas, my teacher. So that is how it is difficult to get to the depth of Pushkin, the importance of Pushkin by a foreigner. Now, before Pushkin came into the scene, what was the scenario in the court? I mean, in the court only, this educated people and these nobles, they stayed, they discussed all these things. It was filled with French speakers, something similar to ours. We all speak English. English has become our lingua franca, kind of, that's a different thing. But we take pride in speaking English. That was the situation in Russia at that time. French was everywhere. French literature was talked about everywhere. Pushkin enthused the indigenous folk items, indigenous language, indigenous idioms, indigenous words, and gave it a new life. Thanks to his nanny. I mean, he has even written a poem to his nanny. In Bangla, we call it Dhaima. It must be Dhatrimata in Hindi. She actually told her folk stories, folk songs, folk tales, and nurtured her, nourished her. And she was like a mother to him. So that lady actually formed the Pushkin that we see in literature. But the criticisms and his appreciations that I read so far, the best has been done by Helen Mushnick. I don't know what is the exact pronunciation, Muchnic. The Helen Mushnick, I'll read a long paragraph from here to tell you that what he really is what Pushkin is really is. Helen appreciates him this way. When Pushkin was born in 1799, the Russian language, although refined by Karamzin and dignified by Derzhavin, was tiltedly used by writers to amuse a Frenchified court. Pushkin was to make it more supple and poetic, and he was also to integrate the foreign and the native elements of Russian culture by writing such work as could rouse not only the interest of the Europeanized aristocracy, but the feelings of those masses of Russians who had not yet found themselves and their hopes so fully or so appreciatively expressed. This was perhaps his greatest achievement. What made it possible was his extraordinary sensitiveness to all literatures and cultures, foreign and domestic, living and dead, which in turn may have been due to a deep-seated division in his own nature, a hardly recognized craving for integration that achieved through poetry a synthesis of wide divergences. He was able, at any rate, to identify himself with modes of feeling that were not his own, a quality of which Dostoevsky made much in his famous speech at the unveiling of the Pushkin Memorial in 1880. Pushkin's Italians, Germans, Egyptians, he said, were convincingly themselves, not like Shakespeare's foreigners, for instance, who always remained Englishmen. in essence. And this capacity to be universal was, he declared, peculiarly Russian. However that may be, it was as a citizen of the world that Pushkin became the poet of Russia. For although he never left his country, he could, as perhaps no one else, grasp the core of an alien civilization, just as he was able to understand intricacies of personality and paradoxes of intellectual systems. Now, why this duality and understanding the foreignness was so strong in Pushkin? If you see a Pushkin's figure, Pushkin's face in the photo, you will see his beards, a typical African beard. Actually, on his mother's side, he had African blood in him. Born into an ancient family of somewhat impoverished boyars, and on his mother's side, descended from Peter the Great's favorite Negro, Abraham Hannibal, Pushkin, by the very circumstances of his heritage, felt himself a divided being. That duality perhaps helped him become more Russian and more universal. And apart from that, in a lighter mode, Pushkin was very handsome. And he was in love with many girls before his actual marriage with Natalia Goncharova, which died in that sad duel. So, and he has written openly love letters to many girls. You can find them in Russian literature. Beautiful poems. I mean, when he writes a poem, you will see that he loves that girl only and loves so passionately. I mean, in our classes, we always read those poems and love those poems. Pushkin was a lover of life in that sense. So his sad death is a death of many things: a culture, a literature, a possibility. Just imagine if Pushkin was living like Tagore, if Lermontov got a life like Tagore, if Mayakovsky, Yesenin, and others who died in Stalin's time got their lives as long as Tagore lived, what could have been the shape and size of Russian literature? They all had untimely death. Okay. Now I'll try to show that Pushkin was a rebel. Pushkin was a non-conformist. Actually, yesterday we had, as you have heard from the video, some discussion was on non-conformism. And I said there can be many kinds of non-conformism, being in the system and still defying the system surreptitiously or openly is non-conformism. And Pushkin was one, and everybody knew it. Before that, I must tell at least of one of his works, Evgeny Onegin, in English, Eugene Onegin, written through a long time, 1823 to 31. This novel in poetry is considered to be the encyclopedia of Russian life by the great critic Belinsky. He thinks that this piece of novel in poetry, captures the essence of Russian life, Russian mode, Russian ways of thinking, Russian ways of life is captured there. So this Evgeny Onegin or Eugene Onegin is considered to be the encyclopedia of Russian life. That is another milestone because of which he is the national poet of Russia. But unlike Tagore, nobody in Russia will ever deny that they are Pushkin's followers. You just mention Pushkin, the face lights up. You just mention the name Pushkin to a Russian man, his face will light up. Oh, Pushkin. Okay. In Pushkin's lifetime, two things happened. The invasion of the Napoleon, 1812, and the Decembrist movement, 1815 to 1825. Both these incidents shaped his patriotism, and by patriotism we mean not only the love of country as a abstract thing, but love of people, the downtrodden people, the exploited people. And he wrote many poems and other things, particularly on the Decembrists. In fact, his own friends were involved in Decembrist movement. When they gathered on 14 December 1825 in front of the Tsar's palace, there was a confrontation between the Tsar's forces, Tsar's army, and the Decembrist forces. And that rebellion was brutally crushed. The leaders were executed, some were executed, some were sent to Siberia, and the people and the ordinary soldiers were simply crushed. At that time, Pushkin was in exile. Oh, I forgot to tell you, Pushkin would often be in exile. I mean, often be exiled by Tsar and not live in the capital, live either in the provinces or in some remote village, because his ways, his poems were not liked by Tsar itself. But they could not do anything directly, but after all, he was a poet and he had some following. So it was not that easy to do anything directly to him in person. So he was in exile at that time. By Tsar's order, in 1826 March, he was called to Moscow, and Tsar personally interrogated him. Tsar asked him, well, Pushkin, what could you have done if you were in the capital on that day, 14th December 1825? Which side you would have been? He said, I would have been with my friends. On the face of the Tsar, he said, well, definitely I would have been with my friends. Now, because of this bold answer and frank answer, something happened to the Tsar and his exile was finished. I mean, he was brought back. At that time, Tsar didn't do anything to him. But the troubles were there all along. There were palace intrigues, there were troubles every time. In 1833, Tsar has given him a special honor and a special khitab, special title, like Tsar was given to Rabindranath Tagore. And like Rabindranath Tagore, he refused it. He refused to take the Tsarist title. And that did not go well with Tsar, definitely. I give you an award and you refuse. How dare you? On top of that, see, he was all the time, a suspicious man in the eyes of the Tsar. On top of that, the church was not happy with him. He was in loggerheads with church as well. They were secretly keeping track of Pushkin, what he is doing, where he is going, what are his ways, whether he was religious or not. So even, apart from Tsar, even the church was keeping track of him surreptitiously. After the duel was a sad thing. It is said that one day, while there was a feast or something in the court, in an open place, one Dantes, a French man, who came behind his wife's chair and made this sign behind her head, that perhaps indicated that he had a secret relation with her. Now, it was an open gathering, some open party going on. And both being from noble families, Pushkin had no other way but to invite him to a duel. The duel happened a few kilometers away from their residence. And Pushkin was a poet. I mean, he didn't know how to shoot. So when he shot, he failed to meet the target. But when Dantes shot, it hit him near the heart. And after 2 days of painful suffering, Pushkin dies. Now, another drama on the deathbed. Being mortally wounded and lying on deathbed, the poet received a message from the Tsar. He said that the state will take all the responsibilities of your wife and family if and only if you allow the church to do your funeral and rituals Christian way. That means if you die a Christian, then only I take the responsibility. Otherwise, I don't know what will happen to your wife and children and your family. Because Pushkin didn't have any money. He had huge debts. Because both he and Natalia, he and his wife, had they were not frugal. They were extravagant in their spendings. And that was the style at that time in the court. They were extremely extravagant. So the huge debts were there. And looking at the faces of his wife and children, Pushkin had to die a Christian death. If he could, he would have refused it, as Tolstoy refused on his deathbed. Although the Padri came and asked him, requested him, he refused. Tolstoy never agreed. The Russian writers, both these writers and some other writers also, both the Tsar and church feared. This is a common thing, at least between these two writers. So that is what I call non-conformism. Those who were not happy with my deliberation yesterday, at least now they have some examples, what I call non-conformism. Of course, there can be other kinds of non-conformism as well. Now I come to the second point, the other point. The point is little man. This little man characters is a unique character born out of Russian literature and spread to other literatures of the world and had a huge influence. Now, who is a little man? If you define, a little man is not only little in his social position, he is little, he is of the lowest rank. In Tsarist Russia, there were 14 ranks. And the clerks and the very petty people will be in the lowest rank. And they will serve all superiors. Generals, captains, this, that, all these ranks will come and take service from them. They were usually poor, somehow lived hand to mouth. They had no honor. They were not treated well, and they were even low in their psyche. That is the main thing. They were poor, both social position-wise, monetary-wise, and also in their psyche, they were fearful, they were afraid, they were not able to protest. That was the situation which very lovingly, very lovingly described Pushkin in his two pieces. The first one is from the Belkin's Tales, The Postmaster. It's a short story. And the second one is The Bronze Horseman, a long poem. I will just describe and compare these two pieces to show what kind of evolution the little man takes, what kind of evolution happens to the little man in Pushkin's times only, in Pushkin's hands only, and what direction he gives to the little man. This tradition was followed also by Gogol in his Overcoat, 1809 to 1852, Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky, 1821 to 1881, and many other writers, and of course Chekhov. And Chekhov gives it almost a different term. So the little men of each and every writer are different. Although there is a common thread, but there is the evolution. And right now, I'm going to show the evolution of Pushkin's little men. Okay, fine. Let us have a look at this literary little man. He is not necessarily little in height, but little in most of other parameters. He is poor, helpless, powerless, both monetarily and socially, and is also little in his very own psyche. He does not possess the will to protest, to fight back, and at times even dares not to hope. He has an aim in life, all right, and wants to achieve it, but when he cannot, he just collapses. These characteristics are common in all little men of a 19th century Russian literature. But in the present discussion, let us focus on only two persons, Samson Virin from Postmaster in Belkin's Tales and Evgeny from the long poem, The Bronze Horseman. I have to narrate the story a little bit so that those who have not read must understand. Otherwise, it has no meaning. Now, remember that postmaster is not the postmaster we understand. Swasti knows it very well. Postmaster at that time was a person posted a few versts. Verst is like kilometer or mile. A few miles later, one postmaster, then another postmaster will be posted. His job was to entertain and change horses for the higher authority people, higher officers, generals, and whoever passes by that road. He will offer food. He will exchange the horses because the horses will be very tired after a long journey. So he will provide food, vodka, whatever liquor, and entertain them and give them a change of horses. And he has to give it. Even if he doesn't have horses, he might be in trouble at the hands of the superiors. This was his condition. And moreover, he was very poorly paid. So that was a little man, the first little man Pushkin creates. I continue. Samson Virin, the postmaster in the story of the postmaster from the tales of the late Ivan Petrovich Belkin, 1830, is considered to be the first little man of Russian literature. Although there were some characters done by Karamzin and Radishev, but they were slightly different. They were more of naturalist type than little man, than realist type. As the story opens up, we find that the Virin family consists of only two members, Samson and his lovely daughter Dunya. I really love the name Dunya, you know. It is such a beautiful name for a girl. His wife died some time back. From household chores to professional hassles, Dunya and her beauty helped Virin in everything. She loved her father and always saved him from the wrath of the higher officials who passed through the posting station frequently, stopped and demanded change of horses immediately. As a postmaster, it was Samson's duty to provide them with horses, and on failing to do so for some reason, he often had to face bitter consequences. The story starts with these very lines. Pushkin writes, I quote, "Show me the man who has never cursed the master of a posting station, or who has never wrangled with one, the man who in a moment of fury has not demanded the fatal volume in which to enter useless complaints of arbitrary behavior, rudeness, and unpunctuality, who does not consider postmasters as monsters in human form, as bad as certain defunct officials, or at any rate no better than the Mudam robbers," unquote. The attitude of the upper class was absolutely clearly documented here. And what does Pushkin himself think about these postmasters? He, I quote, "appeals to the conscience of his readers," unquote, and then writes, I quote, "But for the present, I will merely state that the race of postmasters has been grossly misrepresented to the public. These much abused postmasters are as a rule peaceable folk, of an accommodating disposition, sociably inclined, with no exaggerated sense of what is due to them, and by no means grasping," unquote. So in our story, one such postmaster and his daughter, the Virins, were living fairly well until one wintry evening when Minsky, a young hussar, came to the station. As usual, Dunya had to appear before the stranger to save her father from the rage of the officer. Because again, the same thing happened. He demanded something immediately. Samson was not in a position to supply that, and he was about to be beaten. So Dunya had to appear. And the appearance cast a magic spell on the young man. He not only calmed down for the time being, but also stayed there for 2 more days, pretending to be sick. And the next day, a Sunday, on the pretext of taking Dunya to the village church, eloped with the beautiful girl. The loss of Dunya was too much for Samson to bear, because she was the only thing he had, only thing dear to his heart. And he fell sick. Later, he went to St. Petersburg in order to look for the girl. He was sure that people like Minsky He assured that people like Minsky will enjoy and exploit her beauty for some time and then throw her out onto the street. He desperately wanted to bring back his prodigal child home. On meeting Minsky, he just wept and pleaded, "Your Honor, for God's sake, Your Honor." He was much younger to him, but he is addressing him like that because he was superior. He said, "Your Honor, for God's sake, Your Honor, what is lost is gone forever, but give back my poor dunya." Unquote. There was absolutely no protest, no demand. Samson knew his position in the society very well. Minsky, of course, did not give up or give back dunya. Instead, he gave Samson some money and pushed him out. They met once again at Dunya's residence in St. Petersburg, where he stealthily went to meet his daughter. Samson turned up there just to see his poor Dunya, if only once. This time, Minsky treated his father-in-law, in bracket, in an extremely rude manner. I quote, "Seizing the old man by the collar of his coat with his strong hand, he shoved the man out onto the stairs," unquote. And then, I quote, "The old man went back to his lodging. His friend advised him to lodge a complaint, but the postmaster, after thinking it a while, dismissed the idea with a wave of his hand and decided to leave things as they were," unquote. So this is our little man, meek and resigned to his fate, who came back to his station, started drinking heavily, aged fast, and then died. He was so meek that when he almost saw a well-dressed gentleman steal the money he had thrown on the St. Petersburg street in disgust, the money given by his damad, Minsky. In disgust, he threw up the money. When he saw some gentleman stealing the money and went away, he just watched him drive away fast, but did not show any urge to chase and get hold of the thief. He was so resigned in himself. The story ultimately turns out to be a personal tragedy for Samson Virin. A story where everyone wins except him. This is the point made by my teacher, Chadumati Ramdas. A story where everyone wins except him. In fact, Samson never wanted to win. He begged, pleaded, wept, and cried. And the old saying will always confirm that beggars cannot be choosers. His is an ideal little man character who belittles himself. Pushkin returns to the theme of little man after 3 years. In 1833, Pushkin composes the long poem, The Bronze Horseman, which, according to some of the critics, is his best work. Three years is practically a lot of time, considering the fact that Pushkin died an early death. He was killed in a duel as a result of a court conspiracy when he was only 37, I already told. In this narrative poem, Pushkin calls it A Tale of St. Petersburg as a subtitle. The poet places the little man directly in opposition to the state, which is personalized in the bronze statue of the Tsar Peter the Great, Peter the First. Here, interest of the state and its so-called progress directly hampered the interest of the little man. This time, The little man reacts, albeit in his own way, but unlike our postmaster Samson Vidin. We'll see what was that. The story of the Bronze Horseman goes like this. Evgeny, the hero of the poem, is an ordinary young man in St. Petersburg, the city built by Peter the Great. As a little man in a big city, he lives in abject poverty with no success and no hope of any success in his life. His only hope rests with Parasha, the girl he dreams of marrying in near future and dreams of raising a family with her. The girl Parasha is a fatherless girl, belongs to the same class as Evgeny, is very poor, and lives in a small hut with her mother on the mouth of the river Neva. You know, in all calamities, natural or otherwise, poor people suffer the most. That is precisely what happened in Peter's city too. Petersburg is Peter's city. One fateful night, when a devastating flood made the Neva flow backwards and submerged Petrograd, that was the name of St. Petersburg at that time, Petrograd. Mostly the poor people had to bear the brunt. As the flood water started receding, an intensely anxious Evgeny rushed to the spot where only recently stood Parasha's hut, but he found nothing there. Nothing was there, no hut, nothing. There was no trace, no sign of his beloved or her mother or that dilapidated hut. Everything had been washed away along with his last hopes. Evgeny was almost mad in despair. But soon Evgeny found out who the real culprit was. The person who was responsible for this calamity and thus for the death of his dream. One day, roaming aimlessly about the city like a deranged man, he happened to be in front of the Bronze Horseman, the majestic statue of Peter the Great, Peter I, the founder of the city, maker of this magnificent window onto Europe. Peter the Great called it window onto Europe. He wanted the European civilization, European ways to come to backdated Russia. That is why he built this city in this very dangerous, this precarious place where many people died while making the city itself, building the city itself. At the mouth of the Neva River where it meets the sea. At that point, the city was built. Evgeny knew that because of this Tsar's wish only, the city was built in such a place expressly to cut open a window onto the west. The poor man perhaps did not know that ordinary human lives are always sacrificed for the sake of so-called development all over the world. No planner has ever considered the value of human lives, the cost of human suffering. No town planner has ever thought of it. Evgeny recognized the culprit in the Bronze Horseman and in a fury of anger raised his fist. Just wait and see. That was all he could muster strength to say. Then he got doubly frightened, turned back and fled. But wherever he went, throughout the night, he heard behind him steps a galloping horse's heavy hoofs, as if the bronze horseman was chasing him. He was almost deranged, almost mad. Pushkin writes, till morn, wherever Evgeny, frighted, did bend his steps and wander mute, the fell bronze horseman rode, benighted, in mad, in thunderous pursuit. Unquote. At the end, extreme fear, because he has revolted, he has the audacity to show fist to a Tsar. I mean, extreme fear caught him. At the end, extreme fear and exhaustion of running brought Evgeny's death. In spite of the tragic end, one must note that Evgeny at least did what Samson Vidin could never even think of or even dream of doing. He protested in his own way. He raised his fist and voice against the all-powerful establishment, in this case, the Tsar, the state. And for that brief instant, he ceased to be a little man. At that moment, he was no more a little man. He raised himself up for that brief instant. Evgeny actually initiated a process which would go a long way and become a glorious tradition afterwards, as far as Russian literature is concerned, and world literature would have certainly looked poorer without this famous Russian literary phenomenon as its integral part. In the beginning of the poem, although Pushkin hero worshipped Peter the Great for building such a majestic palaces and the city, but some of the lines make it absolutely clear as to which side he was on towards the end. Pushkin writes, beside it, dead, my madman lay, and there, God rest his soul, was buried. I repeat, pay attention. Beside it, dead, my madman lay, and there, God rest his soul, was buried. Mark it, Pushkin calls Evgeny my madman. And also that the little man of Pushkin at last begins to mature. Like many other firsts in Russian literature, this too is a pioneering contribution by the great Pushkin. I will finish my talk by just another observation, which can be debated, which can be extended, which can be elaborated, that it's a long chain of events, a long chain of literary phenomena that took place in Russian literature. Starting from the naturalism of Karamzin and others before Pushkin, to the realism of Pushkin's characters, to the critical realism of Chekhov's characters, and then in Soviet era, the socialist realism of Sholokhov. You can draw a line between them. The development was slow and gradual, and without the previous steps, the socialist realism could not have come. That is all I have to say right now. Any question, any comment, any observation? Welcome. Although I don't have all the answers, I just initiated the process. We can have a discussion.
Yes, so thank you. That was interesting. So yes, I mean, this is a pertinent issue. And you see, the concept of the little man perhaps has no specific cultural definition, because you see, this concept perhaps transcends boundaries, and we have manifestations, you see, different literary and cultural manifestations of the little man, in fact, throughout genres of world literature. This is really interesting. Pushkin himself being one of the foremost figures, you know, in conceiving of the little man. And of course, this is, this is social realism, but I think this is much more, because this is a narration about man and life, right? So he was writing no epic. He was not writing a Paradise Lost, or he was not writing, an Iliad or an Odyssey, right? But he was writing the story of the everyday, let's say, of the everyday affairs that a very common human individual actually went through. And of course, the individual, you see, as pitted against fate. I'm reminded of some of the characters of Thomas Hardy at the same time. So you see, the protagonist, pitted against fate, and how he actually fights that out. Sometimes not being able to fight that out, he perishes. So this is a stark kind of realism, which of course Dostoevsky, Gogol, and the others, of course, Karamzin, took along further. So you see, a very definite question of comparison between the portrayals of the little man of the other writers and Pushkin also does emerge. And I feel, you see, and as it is very true that there is a universalist kind of portrayal in Pushkin's literature. We were talking about Tagore's universalism yesterday. And today, too, you see, we find this character of the little man coming out of his literature so strongly that Pushkin becomes even more relevant to us these days. Right? Perhaps at some point or the other, we all are, in fact, manifestations in some certain ways of that little man, right? So who can be more realistic? What portrayal can be a more realistic portrayal or depiction, than, of course, the little man? So that is very much there. On the other hand, you see, that is why perhaps this debate whether Pushkin could be considered as a romantic artist or not. As assessment goes, that he had an ability to entertain contrarieties, right, which may seem romantic in origin, but are ultimately subversive of all fixed points of view, all single outlooks, including the romantic, right? So he was, of course, a nonconformist in that way as well, because the very portrayal of the little man is subversive in its own kind, right? So you see, the subaltern theorists would argue for this kind of a portrayal. And of course, we can theorize Pushkin in a lot, many ways. And he was definitely a realist writer, but, at the same time, perhaps he was trying to subvert, some conventional portrayals of epic characters, I think, also in words. So you see, this debate would go on. He was perhaps simultaneously romantic and not romantic, right? So the very portrayal of the little man actually, really overpowers, any other kind of character portrayal, so to speak. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't romanticism in Pushkin. There was, in fact. Right. So yes. So that is why we feel that Pushkin is perhaps all the more relevant now, and he was trying to depict his society. I mean, and that was perhaps his duty, that he was depicting both his society and through, his societal conditions and the characters that he saw around him. In fact, was portrayed by him. I mean, or rather, everything was portrayed by him in such a universal manner. The characters, his society, and everything, the world around him was portrayed by him in a very realistic manner. So yes, questions are welcome. But before that, I see a hand raised. So Rajiv, is there anything that you wish to add or comment?
Yeah, I have a question, but before that, I mean, you are absolutely right. This metaphor, little man, is beyond culture and gender even. So it's not a little man, but it's a little woman also we have. So my question is, Professor Dey, that, when you are giving lecture, it's a wonderful lecture, of course. And two figures were coming in my mind in context of India. One was the Kabir, and another was the Premchand. So, do you think, like, we can link with the Pushkin when we talk about Pushkin, and then we talk about in the broader framework of nonconformist? Yes.
Yes. As nonconformists are everywhere. I mean, because as I said, without nonconformists, you cannot proceed. You cannot proceed ahead. You cannot progress. So nonconformists are there everywhere. But this little man, the Russian little man, even in Russia, the proletariat, or the Russian little man of that time when just the serfdom was abolished, and the serfs were free, but with no money. So every context is different. Serfs were freed by the Tsar. Now, where they go? Where do they go? At least when they were serfs, after a hard day's work, they could have some food. Now serfs are free. Now they don't know how to earn their livelihood. They were absolutely in a worse position, and moreover, everybody is higher above them. So the exploitation was too much. Forget about the insults and the dignity part. So it was very difficult to live. On the other hand, when the industrialization starts, the proletariat start coming, their exploitation was different. All of them are little man in some way or other. But what I'm saying is that the context will differ. We can make comparison of little man, Indian Dalits, and even what you call Indian caste system, the lower castes, and even the proletariat. But you must understand that, but you already know, I'm sure, that in each and every case, the contexts are different. At some place, it is the industrial society that defines proletariat. In some other case, it is the caste system that defines the Dalit, the lowermost rank. In Russian official system, it was the 14th category in the Tsarist hierarchical positions. It is the lowest position, the clerks. You can remember the famous story by Chekhov, The Death of a Clerk. The fantastic story. Again, same, position. I can't, restrain myself. The temptation is too much to tell you the story to people who don't know the story of Death of a Clerk. A very simple story. A clerk who obviously belongs to the lowest rank of the hierarchical system, one Sunday morning goes to a theater. He's very happy and sits quite comfortably and watches the play. Suddenly he sneezes. Okay. Now, anybody can sneeze. It's not a crime. But to his horror, he saw a general was sitting in front of him. And the droplets has touched his, back of his head. The general was just looked at like that and wiped it with his handkerchief. That was all. Nothing else happened. But the clerk was very anxious. Oh my God, it's a general. Of course, he's not my general, because every company was headed by one general. So he was not in that department, but definitely general is a general. Oh my God, I must apologize to him. Otherwise, he'll be angry, and I don't know what could happen to me. So he told the general, "Excuse me, sir, I'm very sorry. I did not wish it." He said, "Okay. He talked like that. That means he is more angry." He was restless. The clerk was restless. So during the interval, he again went to the place where he was standing and smoking cigarettes or something with his friends, and said, "Sorry, sir. Actually, I did not mean to do it." "What are you, guy? Why are you disturbing me? It's okay, go." He went back home, very dejected, and told his wife, "See, I sneezed on the neck of that general, but he's not happy. I tried to, apologize a few times, but he's not accepting. What should I do? He's a general after all. I'm really anxious." His wife said, "No problem. You go Sunday morning, you go to his place and apologize. That is a nice place." Sunday morning, the clerk goes to the general's place. He's a general. He can give certificates and all, and show favors to people. So there was a huge, a lot of people were there. After a certain time, his turn came. He entered and told, "Sir, as you know, on that day in the theater, I inadvertently sneezed on your back and I came to." He could just say up to that. The general was so angry. He said, "Get out of my house. Get out immediately." The poor man, trembling, came back home, sat down on the sofa, and died. Lay down and died. In this story, actually, Chekhov is severely criticizing the little man. He says, "You don't have any dignity. If you are belittling yourself, the system is belittling you, the generals are belittling you, but on top of that, you are belittling yourself. If you don't have any dignity, you can never fight, you can never go ahead and go up." So Chekhov was, lashing out like anything. So that is a very famous story of Chekhov as far as little man is concerned. My point is that little man can take many shapes in many contexts. But social, political, hierarchical context will differ from culture to culture, country to country, society to society. Yeah.
Yes, right. And so far as Rajiv's question is concerned, I think the comparison is absolutely apt, because if you talk about Kabir or maybe Munshi Premchand, of course, you can bring in the concept of the little man to work in their writings as well. In many ways, you see their writings also show as to how the little man is really, as I said, so do I repeat, is pitted against fate, and of course, when we see these these varied literary manifestations of the little man, they actually originate from cultural context. There is no doubt about it. But there is, an element of universality about the concept, which makes these, which makes these writers still relevant, in fact. Right? So whether you call them the subalterns or whether you call them the peripheralized or marginalized, they are there and they continue to be there. That is perhaps the most truthful part of humanity. Right? So that is what, in fact, the greater humanity is all about. So I think it is not only realistic a portrayal on the part of, these writers, but I think these portrayals are extremely universal, portrayals with which you see any individual, in fact, any reader can identify. I mean, if somebody, not from Russia confronts Pushkin's little man, would immediately identify, regardless of the cultural context that he is actually from, or the cultural background he is from. So therein lies, the relevance. And you see, in the midst of all this discussion, I'm also reminded of, Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment.
Yeah.
Right? Now, yes, so you see, there, of course, Dostoevsky probably more often than all Russian writers address the theme of the small person. Right? So as we said that, the little man would manifest himself or herself in many ways, right? So we can recall here, that is why that particular novel, right? Little People, for instance, you see Marmeladov, right, and his family. We have seen in that novel suffering from poverty, hunger, and humiliation, right? And can do nothing with their situation. Right? Now, whatever decision they take leads to disgrace, poverty, or even death, like the death of a clerk by Chekhov. Right? So you see, and therein lies the universality of these characters. In fact, or whether they are brought forth by Dostoevsky or Pushkin or Chekhov or the others, or even writers of our own as well. So I think, and that is the beauty of literature. Literature cuts across cultures, cuts across themes, and cuts across national barriers, right? So there is always that element of universality in literature for sure. Now I see some questions in the box meanwhile as we were into the discussion. Someone asks, why did Minsky never marry the daughter of Samson, Myrene? That is one question. The other question is, was Pushkin recalled during the Russian Revolution? And the third one, did Chekhov want to show through his story the little man himself don't want to be changed? So these are the kind of the kinds rather of questions that have come from three members of the audience.
I take up the last question. Can you repeat it for me once again?
Did Chekhov want to show through his story that the little man himself doesn't want to be changed?
Yes, he doesn't actually want to say that doesn't want to be changed. It's difficult. He says that even his own psyche has become little. Even in his own psyche, he has become so little that he has lost all senses. The system has made him lose all senses. Even though there is no apparent cause of fear, he was afraid to death. And that fear actually caused his death. That general was not his own general. He didn't threaten him. He said, okay, many times. Even then, the system was so heavy upon his head, and the fear was so heavy that it brought his death. That means the little man even lost his sense of, forget about protest, understanding, and any idea of moving ahead stops there. When you know that you are resigned to his fate and you can do nothing about it, any progress is impossible. Yes, Chekhov actually wanted to lash out at them and said, and indirectly said, get up, man. That was the, uh, message, I think.
And was it like it's something to do with his real story? This story is something that he lived, Chekhov lived.
Quite possibly, I don't know, because Chekhov was a fantastic writer. I liked Chekhov for two things. He will not use a single word extra. It's like a poem. His stories are very short, very to the point, and I will not say sweet, it's bitter. Short and sweet? No, short and bitter. He will prick, he will lash, and to the point. Okay, the first question.
Yes. So to add to that question also, you see, did Chekhov want to show through his story that the little man himself doesn't want to be changed? Yes, in a sense, it is so, because and that is the tragedy of the very character, because
I would rather say he has no hope to change. I mean, he doesn't want to change. Maybe in his inner mind, he wants a change, but he is so much, bogged down that he thinks that he has no hope. So he doesn't step forward.
So I think. So yes, that's correct, because metaphorically, perhaps it is a kind of a protest. I mean, through the portrayal, as I was saying, of the little man, it is a kind of a portrayal against, or rather, the restlessness, I would say, of the system, of the existing system, that can really demolish, the fortitude and strength of an individual. Right. So, and normally these individuals, you see, are ordinary characters, in fact, who are victimized, in fact, by such a restless system, in fact. So, I think it's not exactly wanting to be changed. It's an implicit, expression of, really lashing against or lashing out against a system that, of course, is far less than ideal. Another question was Pushkin recalled during the Russian Revolution? Though the question is not very clear in its own self, because recalled would mean
was Pushkin valued? Do you mean
yes,
was Pushkin valued?
Yes, because the questioner asks, was Pushkin recalled during the Russian Revolution?
Yes. The no question of recalling. He was always there, and no revolutionary ever said that we don't need Pushkin. Pushkin was Pushkin, and he was revered by all the leaders of this thing, Russian Revolution. Even after that, so
yes,
he never lost his position.
Right. And he clarifies.
He never lost his position as a great Russian writer.
Yeah, so he clarifies at the end, recalled to raise the passion of the people. So that is what he says. I mean, that is what he means by that word recalled, I think.
Not in the way Mayakovsky did, definitely, but in a subtler way, yes. Not in the way Mayakovsky did. Mayakovsky will go to a dock, stand on a barrel, and deliver his fiery poems. That was a direct contact. Pushkin cannot be used that way. Pushkin cannot be used for revolution in that way. But yes, his ideas, his stories, his poems, everything was revered. respected, and no Soviet writer ever said, we don't need Pushkin. Even Markovsky, just another story, I mean, another very interesting anecdote I want to say. Markovsky once told in one of his poems that Pushkin and me, there's nobody in between. I mean, he was trying to connect to Pushkin in that way. That Pushkin, high above, and me, there's nobody in between. I remember a line something like that in Markovsky's poems.
Why did Minsky never marry the daughter of Samson Virene? So that is another question.
See, yeah, is it okay? Finished? Why did Minsky never marry Samson Virene's daughter? He married. I didn't tell the full story because it was a long story. After the death of the father, Dunya comes back one day in a very beautiful carriage that resembles nobility and wealth, with 3 of his children, comes to the house and learns that father has died. He goes to the cemetery and sheds some tears, and then comes back and goes to the capital the same day. It shows that she has chosen her fate. She was happy with it. Samson Virene was wrong. He was not abused and thrown. He was not abused and thrown out onto the street as Samson Virene was afraid of. He was married to him. He bore him 3 children. They were happy. It is clear. It is very clear from the carriage in which she came and how she came and went back, and he didn't want to stay even the night. His father's memory was not that important for him. Momentarily, she not important for her. Momentarily, she shed tears, but then past is past. His future was ahead. She took his children and went back to the capital. So that is how we see a single thing from different points of view. Samson Virene's point was not the same as the girl's point of view. Is it okay?
Yes. So I think that's all. I don't see any other question.
Can I ask something?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So I just want to know, this is just a query, that was there any such difference in between Tagore's non-conformism and Pushkin's non-conformism?
Tagore's non-conformism was in a very different context. Tagore was born in 1861, and this man died in 1837. And that was the Tsarist Russia. And this was a colonized country by the Britishers. This was a country colonized by Britishers for a long time. And yes, the suffering, the pathetic condition of the ordinary folk were same in both the cases, almost the same, but the social cultural aspects were different. So in that way, I mean, you can compare very lightly, but not directly, I think. I mean, the comparison cannot be put directly to both of them. But everybody, I mean, both of them talked about ordinary people, their lives.
I think, Professor, when you are saying, like, she asked, like, what is the difference between the Tagore and Pushkin? I would compare two great figure, like a Buddha and Kabir. It's like this. So Buddha was like very privileged, and Kabir was a very layman, unprivileged, marginalized, but yet
Yes.
they had the same essence.
Yes. And
Yes. So
Kabir's non-conformism was more subtle. Kabir's non-conformism was more subtle than that of Buddha. Buddha was very prominent. Huh? Yeah.
yes. So I think the historical contexts differ, right? Cultures differ, and the essence and spirit of nonconformism does remain in very different ways, because Pushkin wrote a different kind of literature, right? And Tagore's literature was different, and they had different ideals, in fact, and they were influenced by a whole lot of other philosophies. But Tagore was influenced by a certain kind of philosophy, and Pushkin had a different philosophical background, in fact. So their writings and the nature of their writings would definitely vary. But of course, both of them, in fact, were trying to create a new, let's say, a new poetics of their own, as I was saying yesterday too. They might have been influenced by several other writers and philosophers, but you see, their style, was very distinctive. In fact, as distinctive as to be remembered today. As to be making them live forever. In fact, why are we talking about Pushkin today? Because there is that
Yeah.
element
Still relevant. Yeah.
that and that cuts across national barriers. You see, when we read Pushkin, we don't approach him as an Indian, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe when we read Tagore, we read him for his literature, right? Or when we for Pushkin too, read him, we read for his writing, in fact, right?
Yes.
For the
Yeah.
greatness, yeah, that is latent in his writing. And
Otherwise,
as I was,
yeah.
yes, yeah,
Otherwise, Tagore's volumes would not be sold in lakhs in Soviet Union. I mean, definitely, the reality was different, but
yes,
still, people read Tagore like anything. I mean, it's
yes,
amazing.
right. So you see, that is how. So literature is contextual, but at the same time transcendental, because literature can cut across
Yeah.
national barriers. And one of my students once asked me, and I still remember that question: what is the difference between literature and philosophy? And I just answered him in one line that philosophy gives us the definition of man and life, and literature is the expression, is the very enactment of life. So I think by that we can actually define the two genres of thought and practice. But actually, you say literature does convey philosophy, right? And therefore, we have so many characters. It's so difficult to say whether, as Rajiv was asking, whether the Chekhov really went through all that ordeal, that he narrates in his short stories. It's very difficult to say, because his characters may not be him always, but his characters also may be him, right? So the writer, in fact, himself will not reveal that, because he's not supposed to, perhaps, because he is engaged in imaginative literature, right? So his characters speak for him, in fact, right, and for his work. So so literature is that kind of, let's say, a vehicle of philosophical understanding, and an expression of ideas that perhaps could not have been better conveyed by any other means. So with that, I think we come to the end of today's discussion. We need to read more.
I just
Yes.
want to make one comment. That's what's the raise the issue, and I have thought about it since long, but it will take time. I hope someday I can make a comparative study of Tagore and Pushkin in my later life, if I live long. I don't know. That is
Yeah, I
a
mean,
secret thing in me. But then I never revealed it, not revealing it to Umran only. Maybe after some years, I will come up with a comparative study of both of them. But it's a very hard work. Right now, it's not possible. Maybe after my retirement, let's see. Yeah, thank you. Thank you all.
yes, yes. So these comparisons will go on, debates would go on, and discourses would emerge. And when we discuss, more ideas are exchanged, and you see, we come to be enthused with further research, of course, which is absolutely possible, because when we talk about writers of this height, then of course. I mean, there can be researches to any extent, in fact, so to speak. And as critics and appreciators of literature, it is our responsibility, as I was also saying yesterday, it is our responsibility to take these writers ahead, right? To give new readings, in fact, of their writings. So, with the hope that, of course, the members in the audience today would be certainly encouraged to do that in the future, and hold discussions further, and take these discussions also ahead. We would come to the conclusion of this two-day webinar, and I thank the speaker, Dr. Dey, and Umran and Rajiv, of course, and of course his team always does, a brilliant work, comprising very hardworking people out there. So with thanks to one and all, without you, this wouldn't have been possible. And of course, Swasti and then Fatima Fusunsari. I also thank one of our colleagues, Dr. Shravan Kumar, who has joined us today. So with that, we come to the end of this session. Thank you all for joining us today. And over to you, Rajiv, now to actually formally declare the end of this webinar. Yes.
Thank you very much, Professor Sajal Dey and Professor Mousumi G Banerjee. It was really a wonderful session, I must say that. And I'm sure that many have benefited, but I myself have benefited a lot. First of all, I would like to similarly, like, you started with the Guru, like, you said Naman to Guru, Guru Naman, and you all are the Guru. I mean, you are all our Guru, and we are disciples actually, and you all are the exemplar or the manifestation of that, even the little man or even the nonconformist for me, and you are paving the way for all of us. So we are just following your footstep, like, you are showing the way. And in that broad nonconformist, or Professor Bruce Lawrence uses the cosmopolitan spirit. I would like to put all of you, of course, and especially and also Professor Bruce, and I would like to start actually in this broader framework that is my research work is from Buddha. The Buddha is the, like, the one of the pioneer, or maybe for me, like, that from where I can imagine, there must be many, and then it comes till you, and then it will pass on. And we are very happy to carry this essence and this spirit, this spirit that we will be happy, that will benefit humanity, that will always take care of humanity throughout. So UMRAN Academic Research Association is that it is carrying this spirit. It is trying to carry the spirit and keep this spirit alive, the cosmopolitan spirit, or Dr. Sajal Dey would say non-conformist spirit, perhaps. So we would continue, and in our upcoming session, which will be based on this cosmopolitan spirit that we are carrying on. Our talks will be and a symposium. I remember one of the book that the Professor Bruce Lawrence had written, Teaching Islam, or Islam Teaching, which was published by Oxford University in 2003. And he starts this book, the first chapter, he starts with the Amrit Sen, another Bengali writer and thinker. So he visited Duke University, and Professor Bruce Lawrence was the professor there. And he visited in 1998. And how can he forget to mention Rabindranath Tagore? And in context of multiculturalism. So not multiculturalism, but broader term, the cultural complexity. Al-Baruni and Akbar. So Akbar and Al-Baruni, both of them as the heroes of Professor Bruce, the cosmopolitan spirit that they carried. So of course, that's how the cosmopolitan spirit has been carried. And then Kabir, who inspired even the first the poetry of Kabir, which went out of India by Rabindranath Tagore. He translated the poetry of Kabir, and today many people are reading the poetry of Kabir, which goes beyond the boundary of political boundary or cultural boundary, and which is still relevant to us. And we will keep working on, and we would like to have more discussion on such topics. And I would also encourage all of you to join other sessions. And I have already shared the WhatsApp link in a group. You can join. And we are hoping you can be a member of UMRAN Academic Research Association. We will be sharing the links for application in the WhatsApp group. We are hoping also to provide stipends to research students to encourage to work on our project, or the cosmopolitan spirit or non-conformist spirit we are working on, and we will encourage people to carry on this spirit. So thank you very much, all of you who are still tuned with it was a quite long session, and it shows that you are really, you have been very much into this webinar, and we will see again. I'm thankful to UMRAN team, especially Swasti and Fatima and Jamil and other member of UMRAN, Fusun Sara, and it was amazing. It's a unity, like, we cannot stand alone. So thank you very much, all of you again, and wish you good night if you are in India, and even in Turkey, good night, and somewhere it is day, good day. Thank you and namaste.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Rajiv Kumar, Professor Banerjee, Swasti, Fusun Sari, and all others who made it possible. Thank you very, very much. And
I would greatly like to thank both the professors, my respected gurus. What a marvelous session we just have. It's just outstanding. Thank you very much, professors. For you, we get to know a lot. We rather enriched ourselves. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
I would say here, like, we miss Professor Bruce Lawrence, but Bruce Lawrence, if he could have been here, so but he would be never always around us, with us, but his spirit will be with us. We will be carrying the spirit of Dr. Sajal Dey and the spirit of Professor Mousumi G Banerjee, and even the spirit that has been carried through the UMRAN will be carried by someone else. So we will be not missing. We will be having that spirit always. So thank you very much, and again, namaste. Take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.